Shocking news: voters in the 2024 presidential election are not overly enthusiastic about their selections. The average opinion of 538 respondents is that only 43% of Americans think favorably of the former President Donald Trump, while 53% do not. Furthermore, just 40% of Americans think well of President Joe Biden, while 55% do not think same. It's historically unusual for any major party nominee to be this unpopular, let alone both of them. Using 538's current polling average methodology, we went back and calculated retroactive favorability averages for every Democratic and Republican presidential nominee since 1980. By late October before the election, only 7 of the 22 candidates had negative net favorability ratings. Biden versus Trump is one of history's most unpopular matchups. The average net favorability rating of each Democratic and Republican presidential candidate in late October of presidential election years since 1980, based on 538's current polling average methodology applied retroactively. If Trump's and Biden's net favorability ratings remain underwater through Election Day, 2024 will be only the second presidential election since at least 1980 in which Americans had a negative view of both candidates. The first was in 2016, which also happens to be the only recent presidential election in which the two candidates were, on average, more disliked than Trump and Biden are now. It's possible that, with most Americans entrenched in their partisan camps and believing that the country is on the wrong track, we've entered an era of perpetually unpopular presidential candidates. Before 2016, no presidential nominee in at least 36 years was more than 9 percentage points underwater. Since then, 5 of the 6 have been. Granted, that assumes that Trump and Biden will remain this unpopular all year long. There are still 7 months until Election Day, which is plenty of time for Trump and Biden to improve their standings. However, 3 election cycles is just a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of American history, so this could just be a blip born of this specific political moment. That also raises a question: when both candidates are so unpopular, do their favorability ratings even matter? Let's look again at our retroactive favorability averages for past presidential nominees, this time comparing each one to their opponent. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the candidate with the higher net favorability rating in late October went on to win the election 8 out of 11 times. More popular presidential candidates usually win. The difference between the winning presidential candidates and losing presidential candidates' average net favorability rating in late October of presidential election years since 1980, based on 538's current polling average methodology applied retroactively. But this isn't an ironclad rule. 3 times, the candidate with the lower net favorability rating actually won, although one of those times, then President George W. Bush versus then John Kerry in 2004, they were effectively tied in favorability. And one of those times was 2016, the only other year Americans disliked both nominees. That year, Trump defeated former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton despite having a lower net favorability rating than she did, -25 points versus -12 points. It stands to reason that funny things can happen in the rare instances when Americans dislike both options. When one candidate is popular and the other candidate is unpopular, it's pretty easy to predict what's going to happen: the popular candidate is going to win. But when both candidates are unpopular, neither candidate can get to a majority without winning over some voters who dislike them. That means predicting the winner of the election isn't as simple as just picking the less unpopular candidate. True, it's mathematically easier for that candidate to get a winning number of votes, just because they have fewer haters to convert. But they still have to convert some, and that means forcing those haters to make a choice about who they hate less. That's a different question than which candidate has a smaller number of haters, and it's something a favorability rating can't tell us on its own. Thankfully, some pollsters ask respondents not just whether they have an unfavorable view of the candidates, but also how strongly they feel that way. And on this score, Trump and Biden are more evenly matched. According to a simple average of polls conducted in March, slightly more Americans have a strongly unfavorable view of Trump 43% than have a strongly unfavorable view of Biden 42%, despite the fact that Biden's overall unfavorable rating is higher. Trump haters tend to feel more strongly than Biden haters. Share of Americans who have an unfavorable and very or strongly unfavorable opinion of former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden, in national polls conducted entirely in March. This is, in a nutshell, why Biden is not necessarily doomed just because his net favorability rating is -15 points and Trump's is -10 points. The candidate with the higher net favorability rating doesn't always win the election, especially when both candidates are underwater. You have to consider how intensely those disaffected voters hate them.